A latifundium is a very extensive parcel of privately owned land. The latifunda of Roman history were great landed estates specializing in agriculture destined for export. Grain, olive oil, or wine. They were characteristic of Magna Graecia and Sicily, Egypt, the Greater Maghreb and Hispania Baetica. The latifunda were the closest approximation to industrialized agriculture in antiquity, and their economics depended upon slavery. During the modern colonial period, the European monarchies often rewarded services with extensive land grants in their empires. The forced recruitment of local laborers allowed by colonial law made these land grants particularly lucrative for their owners. These grants, fazendas or haciendas, were also borrowed as loan words, Portuguese latifundios and Spanish latifundios or simply fundos. Agrarian reforms aimed at ending the dominance of the latifunda system are still a popular goal of several national governments around the world. Ancient Rome. The basis of the latifunda in Spain and Sicily was the ager publicus that fell to the dispensation of the state through Rome's policy of war in the 1st century BC and the 1st century AD. As much as a third of the arable land of a new province was taken for agri publici and then divided up with at least the fiction of a competitive auction for lease holdings rather than outright ownership. Later in the empire, as leases were inherited, ownership of the former common land became established by tradition, and the leases became taxable. The first latifunda were accumulated from the spoils of war, confiscated from conquered peoples beginning in the early 2nd century BC. The prototypical latifunda were the Roman estates in Magna Graecia and in Sicily, which distressed Pliny the Elder as he traveled, seeing only slaves working the land, not the sturdy Roman farmers who had been the backbone of the Republic's army. Latifunda expanded with conquest to the Roman provinces of the Maghreb and in Hispania Baetica, the south of Spain. Large villa holdings in the Campania around Rome, in the valley of the Po and in southern Gaul organized populations in a self-sufficient economy, more similar to the haciendas of Latin America, while they produce oil, wine or garum for exportation. The practice of establishing agricultural coloniae as a way to compensate Roman soldiers formed smaller landholdings, which would be accumulated by large landholders in times of want. Thus the direction, over time, was in larger consolidations of landholdings. Latifunda could be devoted to livestock or to cultivation of olive oil, grain, and wine. However, in Rome, they did not produce grain and Rome had to import grain. Ownership of land, organized in a latifunda, defined the Roman senatorial class. It was the only acceptable source of wealth for senators, though Romans of the elite class would set up their freedmen as merchant traders and participate as silent partners in profits to which senators were disqualified. The latifunda quickly started economic consolidation as larger estates achieved greater economies of scale and senators did not pay land taxes. Owners reinvested their profits by purchasing smaller neighboring farms, since smaller farms had a lower productivity and could not compete in an ancient precursor of agribusiness. By the 2nd century AD, latifunda had in fact displaced small farms as the agricultural foundation of the Roman Empire. This effect contributed to the destabilizing of Roman society as well, as the small farms of the Roman peasantry were bought up by the wealthy and with their vast supply of slaves, the landless peasantry were forced to idle and squat around the city of Rome, relying greatly on handouts. Overall, the latifunda increased productivity. It was one of the greatest levels of worker productivity before the 19th century. Such consolidation was not universally approved, as it consolidated more and more land into fewer and fewer hands, mainly senators and the Roman emperor. Efforts to reverse the trend by agrarian laws were generally unsuccessful. Pliny the Elder argued that the Latifundia had ruined Italy and would ruin the Roman provinces as well. He reported that at one point just 6 owners possessed half of the province of Africa. But then again, Pliny the Elder was very much against the profit-oriented villas as presented in the writings of Columella. His writings can be seen as a part of the conservative reaction to the gain and profit-oriented new attitudes of the upper classes of the early empire. Ancient Greece. The landscape of the Greek mainland does not lend itself to large estates. Olive oil and wine for trade were typically produced by many small groves and vineyards, concentrated in fewer hands at the presses and shipping ports. The grasslands of Thessaly and Macedon were pasture for grazing horses. Meat was not a staple in Mediterranean diets. During the Hellenistic period, Latifundia were typical of the export-oriented agriculture of coastal Syria and the Ptolemaic Kingdom in Egypt, Europe. In the collapse of the Western Roman Empire, the largely self-sufficient villa system of the Latifundia remained among the few political-cultural centers of a fragmented Europe. These Latifundia had been of great importance economically, until the long-distance shipping of wine and oil, grain and garum disintegrated. But extensive lands controlled in a single pair of hands still constituted power. It can be argued that the Latifundia formed part of the economic basis of the European social feudal system. The gift of a villa, or of a series of them, owned by a powerful patron was at the basis of all the great monasteries and abbeys founded in Western Europe until the time of Charlemagne, when the land gifts, significantly, tended to be of forest instead. Italy in the 6th century, Cassiodorus was able to apply his own Latifundia to support his short-lived vivarium in the heel of Italy. Shortly thereafter, Monte Cassino was founded in a former imperial villa. But in the 10th century, Cluny Abbey in nearby Burgundy was founded on a gift of the Duke of Aquitaine's chase. In Sicily, Latifundia dominated the island from medieval times. They were abolished by sweeping land reform mandating smaller farms in 1950 to 1962, funded from the Cassa per il Mezzogiorno, the Italian government's development fund for southern Italy. Spain in the Iberian Peninsula, the Castilian reconquista of Muslim territories provided the Christian kingdom with sudden extensions of land, which the king ceded as rewards to nobility, mercenaries and military orders to exploit as Latifundia, which had been first established as the commercial olive oil and grain Latifundia of Roman Hispania by Utica. The gifts finished the traditional small private ownership of land, eliminating a social class that had also been typical of the Al-Andalus period. In the Iberian Peninsula, the possessions of the church did not pass to private ownership until the ecclesiastical confiscations of Mendizábal. The secularization of church-owned Latifundia, which preceded impulses through the 19th century. Big areas of Andalusia are still populated by an underclass of jornaleros, landless peasants who are hired by the Latifundists, day workers, for specific seasonal campaigns. The jornalero class has been fertile ground for socialism and anarchism. Still today, among the main Andalusian trade unions is the Rural Workers' Union, a far-left group famous for their squatting campaigns in the town of Marinalida, province of Seville. Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth. Following the Union of Lublin in 1569, large expanses of land in Ukraine came under the control of the Polish crown, allowing for their exploitation by the Polish nobility. Over the course of the 17th century, these lands came to be mainly concentrated in vast estates, now commonly referred to as Latifundia, which were owned by a small number of magnate families which came to be the dominant political and social group in the Commonwealth. These estates were diminished following the Cossack uprisings of the 17th century and largely disappeared following the Russia's annexation of the Lithuanian lands of the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth at the close of the 18th century.